Hello and welcome to the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. My name is Aidan Muir and I'm here with my co-host Torwen Eerkens, and this is episode 239 where we're going to be talking about iron deficiency and the best ways to address it. So we're going to start by talking about common causes, which populations are at risk. I do think the populations that are at risk is pretty well known. We know women with menstruation, that's a big factor. We know any form of bleeding, so GI bleeding from inflammatory bowel disease. Women with pregnancy, iron needs get really, really high there as well. And then also endurance athletes as well, particularly running, this whole concept of hitting the pavement and then the impact that that has as well plays a role as well. Then other people with reduced absorption, so say celiac disease, if that's not resolved, and going back to IBD, it's kind of affecting in both angles there. And potentially people with really high intake of anything that could be inhibiting it, whether it's tea or coffee or anything else.
And then the signs and symptoms of being iron deficient. So often people will come in complaining about tiredness, headaches, dizziness, weakness, and then potentially if they are exercising, so poor exercise performance, shortness of breath, that sort of thing. In terms of testing for iron deficiency, so the simplest way to check iron status is with a full blood count plus iron studies. So ferritin is the main marker of your iron stores. And when levels drop below the 30 micrograms per litre in many adults, this suggests low iron. Now we do check things like transferrin saturation, serum iron and TIBC to help confirm that it's iron deficiency and there's not any other sort of inflammation going on.
Absolutely. And I'm surprisingly passionate about kind of addressing this. I suppose it just ties into the whole reason why I'm a dietitian to start off with, but it does kind of kill me a little bit seeing somebody being fatigued and there could be an easy solution. And I get that there are many times where it might not seem like an easy solution because there's been stuff that's been tried in the past and hasn't worked and everything like that. But I suppose with the knowledge that we have and the stuff we'll talk about today, there's so many ways around that, which is why in my head I perceive it as an easy solution. We're going to start with supplements. We are also going to talk about food, but the reason we're going to start with supplements is because when we're talking about addressing a deficiency and ideally doing it quickly, supplements can move the needle the most. So, common supplements.
So most iron supplements come in two main forms, and we're talking about ferrous salts, which is Fe2+, which is something like a ferrograd C, or ferric forms, which is an iron polymaltose, which might be Multifer. Those are the most common supplements. There is always the alternative of doing something like an iron infusion, which gives you intravenous iron, but those are the most common ones that we see.
Absolutely. And the common logic with which ones to choose is starting with something like ferrograd C over Multifer. It's been well known to be quite effective. I spoke with our team, so Torwen obviously as well, about I've seen research, and I cannot go back and find this. I don't know what the name of the study was, but comparing ferrograd C to Multifer, where ferrograd C massively outperformed, way more than you would expect. If I don't want to misquote the numbers because I couldn't find the study, so it's obviously not in the show notes too, but it was it increased iron stores by over 100%, whereas Multifer is about 7%. I personally believe that if you read this study with larger sample sizes, so on and so forth, the gap wouldn't be that big. But that's a crazy big gap. So it's start with ferrograd C, right? That's often the move. Why is the common thought process to start with that, but we have another option? Why wouldn't we just do the main one? And it's often been based around the fact that ferrograd C is more likely to cause gastrointestinal symptoms, whether it's constipation, sometimes nausea as well, and Multifer is less likely. What this study did find was that the frequency of symptoms was actually similar between the two, so it's not like Multifer doesn't cause these symptoms at all. But when we were looking at quite severe symptoms, then ferrograd C was more likely. I don't know if I've got it on my list. I don't know if you've got it on your list, but we can talk about how to address the symptoms. Do that in the later section or here.
Let's chat about it. So like Aidan said, side effects of iron supplementation are super common. Constipation, nausea, dark stools are actually pretty normal for most people to experience. So with constipation, there are a few things we consider. Obviously doing the immediate things of increasing fluids, fibre, and potentially, like you say, if it's very bad, switching to a gentler form like Multifer. Nausea, taking it at nighttime or potentially with a smaller snack to help with that nausea as well. Now, Aidan and I have had a discussion off air about this as well, but there is some discussion about taking iron supplementation every second day and not daily. The reason we say this is because your body does produce hepcidin, a hormone that temporarily blocks iron absorption for about 24 hours after a dose. Does it block it completely? No, but potentially there is some evidence then to say, should you take an iron supplement every second day rather than every day? If you are someone who is experiencing extreme side effects like the nausea, potentially more so than the constipation, I would say trialing every second day could be something that helps with these things.
I also think with the constipation one, that's often the most common one I've seen people choosing not to take anything. And I go back to the thing about being like, oh, I'd rather people not be fatigued. And it's like, if this is a common side effect, do we address it? Everything Torwen said there. And I also think if you go and find our podcast that I've done previously on just on nutrition for constipation, if you Google nutrition tips for constipation that actually work, ideal nutrition, you'll see a blog post that's got this. And that's why I'm just like, we can address that symptom. There's so many things that can be done there as well. Another way of thinking about it is you could do that less frequent dosage if it's so much more effective than Multifor as well. You could potentially do lower dosage. It's not really recommended, but it is an idea to chuck out there. There's in Australia, I don't know where the cutoff is, if it's below 50 or something like that, but if an iron supplement has somewhere below 50, whether it's 40 or something like that, it can no longer be marketed to address a deficiency because it just doesn't move the needle quickly enough. But you can use a bit of common sense and be like, well, if it's so much more, it's still better than nothing, right? So there's definitely stuff that can be done there. Going to another area on this, alternative routes like liver or spleen supplements. Thoughts on that?
Look, again, like you said, the amount of iron in those supplements can potentially be low. I have actually anecdotally heard clients who say that they feel like they have much more energy when they take these beef liver supplements which supposedly contain iron. If we look at food, yes, beef, like that sort of like offal can contain a fair bit of iron. In a supplement, it's such a small amount. I would just go for a normal iron supplement.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got even more extended thoughts there. So often these supplements will have like 1 to 3 milligrams of iron. To put context, Ferrograd C has 105 milligrams of elemental iron and Multifor has 100. So you can see like 1 to 3 versus 105, huge difference, right? Although you can make arguments about food first and everything like that. Liver supplements are actually incredibly nutrient rich in general for the size that they are. And you can see how that could like carry over to other forms of energy as well. I'm not opposed to most people just adding nutrient rich stuff in general. But there is a bit of a gap. So I've thought for a long time being like, hey, it's not high enough to move the needle. But then one day a client came to me and like I was going to like go and like show them, see how it's not super high or whatever. And we put up the website and it had like 15 milligrams. It's like, oh, you've actually found an outlier here. And there are ones that have 10 plus milligrams of heme iron, which is like the best absorbed form. Often they're like beef spleen and liver, like usually not just like beef liver or anything just by itself, which might move the needle more. It's definitely not gold standard for treating iron deficiency, but some of these can be relevant. One key point that I do really want to add there is often I've had people report having this because it doesn't cause the symptoms. Food for thought, even if it's still at 10 milligrams, you're looking at 1/10 of the dosage. It's like if you had 1/10 of that dosage of Ferrograd C, you probably won't get symptoms either. So like I wouldn't just use that as the only reason to make a switch to this, but there's many other thoughts there too.
One thing that I wanted to add on to that is when you're supplementing for iron deficiency, then we may need those higher doses. If you're someone whose iron is within range and maybe you just want to use something like a beef liver supplement to keep it within range, go for it. Then I'd be much more open to adding something like that in. Yeah,
absolutely. And like adding on to that whole like painful thing about like I hate seeing people fatigued if they don't need to. There is a trend of getting deficient, supplementing to address it, stopping the supplement, getting deficient. And it's just like, it's a cycle. And there's definitely many ways around it, like exactly what you just said there. Maybe dietary changes as well, maybe just less frequent supplementation as well, whether it's like dropping back to like twice a week or something. Like a lot of these things aren't common, but if you did get regular tests and took a step back, you could see routes in which you could keep it in a good level. But let's talk about dietary strategies.
I mean, it makes sense that if your iron is low, we need to have a look at what your iron, like how many iron-rich foods have you got in your diet and can we increase that? So jumping back to the types of iron in food, we know that there's heme versus non-heme iron. Heme iron is from animal sources. It's best absorbed. So lean, red meats, livers, offal, dark poultry again, sardines and other oily fish are all fantastic sources. And then we have non-heme iron, which is plant-based, less efficiently absorbed. Not to say that these foods can't have high amounts of iron, but your body does absorb it less efficiently. So lentils, chickpeas, kidney beans, baked beans, tofu, tempeh, all sorts of nuts and seeds, iron-fortified cereals, dark leafy greens and things like that.
Yeah, and obviously, like with Leah previously co-hosting this, like she's made a bunch of content on like ways with non-heme iron you can get super high. There is a lot of those fortified products that, like, I think there's like, I don't know if it's still exists, plant-based Milo. Like plant-based Milo is like super high as well, or vegan Milo. Anyway, but there's a bunch of stuff that you can do to get there. I don't know if you mentioned vitamin C as well. Like,
I think let's chat about that. So that's one of the ways that you can enhance absorption. Absolutely. And the way that it works is that it helps your body change this iron into a form that's much more easily absorbed and keeps it soluble as it moves through the intestines, which is important.
Absolutely. And then when we mentioned like tea and coffee earlier, like there's like tannins in tea, there's a potential interaction with caffeine, reducing it a little bit as well. I wouldn't overthink this type of stuff, but these are all little wins that can play a role. Potentially going extreme with certain stuff. I once had a 12-year-old guy who was a client of mine who had low iron, partly because he was having over 2 liters of milk a day. And it's just like, it's just the calcium, like it's just so high. And it's very rare for somebody in that kind of demographic to have low iron, but that's another kind of factor to keep in mind as well.
So how much iron do you actually need? Let's have a chat about it. So for most adult women, it's 18 milligrams a day. After 51, we look at 8 milligrams a day. Adult men, 8 milligrams a day. And then, like Aidan mentioned at the start, at pregnancy, it just shoots through the roof. So 27 milligrams a day, which is a lot. And like we said, if you're vegetarian or vegan, then you might need to up this intake a fair bit to make sure that you're getting the same amount of absorbable iron in your diet.
To add context onto that, if those numbers don't mean anything, obviously red meat is like one of the most well-known sources of specifically heme iron. And to get 2.5 milligrams from red meat takes about 100 grams of red meat. If you had 200 grams of red meat, you're looking at like 5. A piece of context I like to put out there is like, if my needs are 8 milligrams and I had 5 from that and then the rest from like non-heme iron, super easy. Like you can see why I'm unlikely to become deficient. Once you go up to that 18, you can see how it's like if somebody got an iron deficiency and the game plan was to add red meat twice a week, for example, you can see it's not really moving the needle because like what if it's not like a super large portion? What if it's like 150 milligrams? It's like, okay, now you're like 3.5 milligrams out of your 18. And you're also trying to address a deficiency, not just like maintain. And then you chuck pregnancy and it goes up to 27 and it's hard.
And that's why a lot of these iron fortified cereals can be helpful, iron fortified foods, like you say, Milo. All of a sudden we're getting so much closer to at least maintaining at around that 18 milligrams a day. Was there anything else you wanted to add on there? No.
Happy to wrap up there.
Amazing. Well, this has been episode 239 of the Ideal Nutrition Podcast, where we covered the best ways to address iron deficiency. If you think someone you know would benefit from some of the things that we spoke about, please send this through to them. Otherwise, we'll be back for the next episode. Thank you.